Hello, everyone. So thank you so much for joining us on this Wednesday evening. Again, we are here with Dr. Blackwood, and we are so honored to have him back again to discuss a very, very important subject matter for our mental health workshop. There he is. Thank you, Dr. Blackwood, for joining us, as well as all of you that have just joined us as well. If you could please just drop your name and emails in the chat, just so that we have an idea of who is here, as we do have an incentive to give as well. So that would be very appreciative and very helpful on our end. With that being said, I don't want to hold us back any further. And I know we're all here and very excited to hear what Dr. Blackwood has prepared for us today. So without further ado, Dr. Blackwood, I will make you the host. All right, so you are able to share your screen now. Thank you, Dr. Blackwood. Oh, you're on mute, Dr. Blackwood.
Thank you, Nicole, very, very much. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I hope you all are doing well. For those of you who are new to me, I'm going to introduce myself, and I'm going to get this sharing thing happening. Let's see. First, just about there. There we go. Okay. So I am Dr. Andrew Blackwood, also known as Coach Drew the Compassionate. I'm just playing. Nobody has ever called me that, but you can call me that if you'd like. I am the healing communication coach, and I love to help people heal. I love to help people move into the life that they want to live, that they've been created to live. And quite often, sadly, much of the experiences that bring people to me are as a result of not experiencing compassion. So tonight's going to be very experiential. I know I do a lot of talking and a lot of sharing, but tonight I've set myself up so that I can actually engage with you in the chat. Okay, so I have a couple devices going here. So let's get it tested. Let's test this out a little bit. I'm going to give you guys a chance to talk to me. How many people would say they've experienced compassion in their lives? If you can say, yes, I've experienced compassion, I want you to put yes in the chat. And if no, put no in the chat, okay? I want to make sure this is right. This is working for us. Okay, yes, so we've got a couple yeses. Yes, yes, okay, good, some good yeses. And that's really, really good. That's good. And it's good that the chat is working. Good. It's important to experience compassion in our lives. And I know that children, they are uniquely wired, at least most of them, to be compassionate, right? I mean, they have this ability to let things go. It's remarkable. If you ever worked with children, or if you have children, you've seen them build things, and sometimes those things get demolished, and they get demolished by other children, sometimes on purpose. And yeah, they might be upset, they might be hurt, but give it a couple minutes and they're rebuilding. They're doing it again, and they're allowing somebody else into that same space. It's amazing to watch that whole experience of forgiveness, right? They move through things. They don't hold on to things. But then we get older, and sometimes things stick a little bit more. Sometimes that openness and that desire to build and to re-engage with life, it gets knocked out of us, literally. And I don't know if you've ever been there, but if you've ever wondered, like, what's the point? Why bother? You start to think to yourself, there is no point. There's no point in trying. There's no point in trying to help. There's no point in trying to rebuild. If you've ever thought that way, you're not alone. You are not alone. Um, so I remember when I was in my last year of high school, and I know I'm dating myself when I talk about OACs and Ontario academic credits. That's like grade 13. They had that at some point. Um, and I was not doing well in school. I really was not doing well in school in some of my courses. And I failed chemistry. And honestly, it knocked the wind out of me, and it knocked the hope out of me. It knocked the future that I wanted out of my mind. It was just over. I had really strong all or nothing patterns of thinking. That's how I thought. And believe it or not, I had so little compassion for myself. Compassion for myself. I mean, I never really thought about it that way, but I had no fight in me. I had no drive. I had nothing. And because I was so empty, I didn't have anything to give to myself in that moment. And that's what we're going to be talking about. Like, what really is compassion? How does it apply to me? How does it apply to other people? What difference does it make? How does it shape our mental wellness and our lives? We're going to talk about that. And when I say we, I mean me and I mean you. Okay. So be prepared. Because the reality is, I know I'm not the only one who's had challenges in his life. I know you all have had challenges too. There is pain in this life. There is no shortage of pain. There's no shortage of trouble. There's no shortage of trauma. So, in that sense, I live in the same world that you do. And those of you who are watching the replay, yes, this applies to you too. So, we're going to be talking about the impact of compassion or the lack of compassion and the opportunity that compassion holds for us. Because you don't have to look very far to see pain. You can see it in the news, you can see it in the neighborhood you live in, you can see it in your living room. But as I mentioned before, you can also see it in your life, in your memories, in your emotions, in your thoughts. There is pain everywhere. And sometimes we wonder, what difference does it make? Well, I know depression firsthand. So if you've never made a correlation or a connection between depression and a lack of compassion, I want you to think about it. If you've had experiences of depression or maybe even intense anxiety, I would encourage you to look for the presence of compassion. Do you see anywhere in there, anywhere in your life? Um, and my guess is you're going to find a hard time finding it. Where there is little compassion, there's little health and vibrance and love. A world without compassion, I would argue, is a world that's going to be very difficult to live in. Very difficult to live in. And, so if you decided like me that depression is not the route for you and you want to do something, but you can't find it within yourself, that sense of emptiness, this is where we turn to the strength of compassion. You might think that compassion really has nothing to do with strength, but it has everything to do with strength. I see compassion as the perfect blend of sympathy and empathy in action. Okay. Sympathy and empathy in action. There are these components, right? It's a mix of all these three things. And when I think of sympathy, I often think about someone feeling sorry for someone. And when we feel sorry for someone and we don't take action, it's just pity. It's just pity. And a lot of people, I don't know if you've heard people say this before, but they don't want your pity. People have a push against that. right? If you want to do something for somebody and all they sense from you is pity, right? Then they're not going to be as receptive. There's something about taking action when you have sympathy for someone that moves it beyond sympathy and turns it into compassion. Then there's empathy. If you have empathy for someone and you do nothing, sooner or later, that's going to roll over into guilt and maybe even depression, right? I remember I was driving many, many years ago. I was driving, so I was old enough to drive. And there were these people, they were about to get into this conflict. And, I didn't have the courage to get out and do something, right? And I thought about that for days and days. When we have the opportunity to do something and to take action and we don't, it's going to sit with us. Compassion involves courage sometimes. Okay, so it's sympathy and empathy in action. When you do something, it turns into compassion. Okay, would you guys agree with me? That's a decent working definition of compassion. If you agree, say yes. If you agree, if you think something is missing, I want to know, right? Put it in the chat too, right? If something is missing, by all means, share with me. Like, do you think you can have compassion without action? I think that's a good question. What do you think? Is it possible to have compassion without taking action? Yes or no? Put it in the chat. Yes, you can have actionless compassion. You believe it's true to have actionless compassion? Or do you think compassion, there's got to be this component of action in it? Now, I know sometimes it takes a couple seconds for the responses to come through, but okay, they're coming in. Yes, they go hand in hand. Yes, thank you. There's alignment here. I love it. And I'm open to people disagreeing, right? I'm open to a different perspective too. But I think it really, really matters. It really makes a difference, right? And what's interesting about this, when we understand the action component to compassion, it doesn't explain why horrible things happen in our world and in our lives. It's not an explanation for bad things, but it is a response to bad things, right? It highlights an opportunity. Bad things, every challenge has embedded it within it an opportunity. I really believe that. And when we see that opportunity, we can act on that. And when we act on that, there's something that happens for us. There's something that changes in us, changes in our lives, changes in the situation because we can take action, right? There's no shortage of opportunity to do good. We can always respond to evil with good. We can always respond to bad things or sadness with comfort, right? We can respond to loneliness with friendship, right? When there's a need, compassion moves us to meet that need. And that empowers us. It really actually does make a difference. So, I mean, compassion moves beyond just witnessing life to actually engaging in life. I don't know about you, but have you ever experienced, and I asked at the beginning, has anyone ever responded to you with compassion? I just want you to think about that. Have you ever responded to someone with compassion? And what impact did it have on you? As I was getting ready earlier before hopping on this call, I was out in the backyard and I heard, and I've been hearing it for a little bit, but I actually paid attention and I heard the sound of running water. Running water. And I figured, maybe somebody's watering their grass or whatnot, maybe filling a above ground pool or something. But then the thought came to mind to go and take a look. So It required me to leave my house, go around the corner, and find the right house where, water was coming from. And I rang the doorbell, nobody answered. And I rang the doorbell again, nobody answered. And then I took the risk to kind of move towards the backyard and tried to get, they had a tall fence, tried to peek over, and I could see that there's just water coming out of their hose. And I'm glad I did. I'm glad I went. And nobody answered the door. I tried the next door neighbor, and I tried the neighbor across the street, and I wasn't able to reach anybody. But I felt good about actually taking action and doing something. So after the call today, I'm gonna go and try again. Right. And it's an opportunity. Sometimes we think showing compassion has to be this big action. And sometimes it is. Sometimes it is costly to show compassion, right? But sometimes it's not. It's just the simple things, right? It's the simple things that I think often make the biggest difference. I don't know if you know, but I wrote a book called The Art of a Genuine Apology. And that book is all about taking action when you realize that you've hurt somebody else, or knowing what to do when somebody else hurts you. How do you invite somebody to act in light of your pain? That's what the book is all about. And as much as I wrote the book on apologies, that doesn't mean I never have to offer one. In fact, it's actually more pressure on me to do it well. And let me tell you, I am an imperfect person. And whenever there's an imperfect person involved in a situation, which there always will be, there's going to be hurt. There's going to be misunderstandings. There's going to be pain. But the goal here is not to never have pain. It's not to never, it's not to be perfect. That's impossible. We want to do our best. But the point is, are you ready and able to respond with compassion? And only when you do that do you see the difference that it makes. I know I've misunderstood things. And there was one situation where, basically I thought my daughter was guilty of something. And it wasn't a big deal to me, but it was a big deal to her that I didn't believe her. And when I realized I was wrong, I was able to offer an apology to her. And it was in that moment where I realized how important it is to her that there's trust in the relationship, that I actually believe her word. That matters to her. So by me acting on this, by me taking responsibility for my error, I could see how painful it was for her. And even that was an act of compassion, right? So I want to take a minute and I want to ask you guys to give me some examples. They can be big examples, they could be small examples, but give me some examples. What are some examples of compassion, either that you experienced or that you've extended to someone? I just talked about one, offering an apology, but give me some examples. Let's make this really applicable and relevant. As I wait for responses to come in, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about um, some examples that I know of. Actually, and I'll speak, well, sharing a meal, believe it or not, is a really important aspect of care that we can give to people, whether that means feeding the people who are less fortunate. But I mean, even sharing a meal with somebody in school, a classmate, right? Believe it, people bond a lot over food, right? It happens, right? Okay, giving up a seat on the bus to an elderly person or pregnant woman. Wonderful, perfect example. That is an action of compassion, right? You see that there's a need and you feel a sense of sympathy, right? Maybe even empathy if you've been there before, if you've been tired, or if you've been pregnant and you want to get off your feet, you've had tired feet, right? Doing something about it, that makes a difference. Sometimes we think that in order for something to be really impactful, it has to be big. right? Significance is not about size. One of the things that I, even as a mental health professional and a person who has listened well for years, I didn't realize what a gift listening is. Listening actually requires a great deal of attentiveness. And when you listen well and you cultivate empathy, that is such a gift to people. It's a real gift to people. Okay, someone mentioned donating clothes at a thrift shop. For sure, right? I don't know about you, but if you have ever not had enough clothing or the right outfit or enough money to get what it is that you want or need in a particular situation, it's a blessing to have access. It's a blessing to give for sure. Um, Helping someone when they do not get something, although you think they should, right? Sometimes compassion connects well with justice or fairness. Okay. This is really, really important. Believe it or not, another simple thing that you can do that is an act of compassion is actually acknowledging someone, saying hello, giving a kind word, right? A smile. Believe it or not, so many people are so lonely and devoid of connection. A lot of people think that they don't matter, that their existence is irrelevant. You just acknowledging someone, right? Sometimes you can sense when people are not doing well or when they're down, right? It's good to, I know people don't like to feel unpleasant emotions, but the interesting thing is sometimes those experiences that we have that are unpleasant, they help us to be helpful to other people. When you have a sense that someone isn't having a good day, you don't always have to fix their lives. Sometimes just acknowledging them is an act of compassion, right? Yeah. Somebody said being polite to people when they make you food. And I love to eat, right? But again, people can feel so taken for granted and underappreciated and undervalued by you expressing thanks. And we're going to get into why this matters so much in a few minutes. I love these responses, right? Taking a less privileged sick person to the hospital for medical attention and picking up the bill, right? If there's a cost, right? That sounds like it's right out of the Bible, right? Really helping, right? Sometimes it involves sharing, excuse me, financially, right? Um, Someone experienced a loss, and rather than saying, I know how you feel and respect their mourning process, right? Offering company, whether they want to talk or respect their choice of silence, right? Yeah, you can respect someone's mourning and just be present. You don't always have to say something. Sometimes your presence is enough, right? Showing up. I love these answers. It's so true, right? Again, somebody mentioned smiling and showing that you can see somebody, right? It makes a world of difference. So it's not always the big things that we do, or it doesn't always require a lot. So, let's talk a little bit about the connection between compassion and mental health. So remember, if you are new to me and my understanding of mental health, there is this continuum. And I'm not going to show it today, but I'll describe it of a quality of life that we live on. Okay. So on one end of the continuum of this, or a spectrum, whatever you want to call it, there's existing, right? Where you just barely wake up. You're just breathing. You're just here. Um, and then above from that is where you are coping. Okay. This is where you're just doing a little bit more than surviving. Do what it takes to get through the day. You're having difficulty managing with life, whether it's emotionally, physically, financially, all these things. You're just coping, right? You're just coping. And some of our coping strategies, they're healthy, like going for a walk, right? That could be a great coping strategy. Um, Taking a nap sometimes could be a good coping strategy, right? But then sometimes those coping strategies, they don't lead to change and they don't help us to deal with the situation. So even that taking a nap thing, that could turn into procrastination and avoidance. And you just sleep and you just sleep and you just sleep, right? And it becomes a cycle. A lot of I can't say that I've slept a lot as a result of being depressed, but I know that's one of the things that happens. Depression, it sucks the energy and the life out of you, and then you're just exhausted. And then you sleep, but then that sleeping prevents you from taking action in your own life, right? So even some healthy coping strategies can roll over into being unhealthy. So I want you to remember that coping is not the same as change. Okay. When we have healthy strategies, we integrate them into our lives long term. Sometimes that can really lead to change. You can actually rewire your brain by doing something like having a regular routine for exercise and healthy diet and shifting who you relate to, right? Changing those relationships. Those are subtle yet significant ways to change your life. And that moves you from just coping to living. When we start to live on this spectrum, again, so we've moved from existing to coping, and now we're actually living. That's when you start to experience and bring about change in your own life. Yes, we use coping strategies, but we're actually dealing with issues. And then on the far end is when you are thriving. Okay, you're not just leading your own life, but you are leading your life and investing in the lives of others in a way that you know what works for you about this thing called life. You're living out your purpose to a really, really full degree, right? Where you can say, you know, if my life ended today, I'd be pleased. I believe God would be pleased with me, right? With what I've invested. Like that's a degree of life that we all want to get to. To be honest with you, I'm not there yet, right? I bounce in between like living most days and coping on some days, right? Um, but the point I'm trying to make is when we start to understand where we are on this spectrum, we can start to really then start to see, is there compassion in my life? Because what compassion does, as I talked about earlier, it does one thing that's really, really important. When you see a need and you take action to meet that need, it does something for you as a person. In the face of evil, wrong, injustice, and all that stuff, it actually highlights that you have power. And that's that strength piece at the bottom. So this diagram, just in case you're listening in and not watching, I put a diagram up here, and I believe there are three core human needs that we have as people. And when we experience these needs in our environment, then we thrive, or we get a lot closer to thriving. But the absence of these things, safety, significance, and strength, we don't do well in environments without these things, right? So I'll talk a little bit about what compassion does in terms of bolstering these needs and meeting these needs. And then I'll talk about the absence of it, right? When we act with compassion, we actually realize, oh, I can impact change. I have the power to do that. You are empowering yourself by taking action. When you don't take action, you are denying yourself of that realization, both the awareness and the actual activation of that power. It's like a battery that never gets put in anything. It's just going to sit there. And that's quite often what we do as people, right? We don't seize the opportunities to act, right? When we act with compassion, we realize my choice matters. My choice actually makes a difference. And that does wonders for people. Okay. It does wonders for people. And as you can see in this diagram, our sense of strength, our sense of power, it overlaps with significance. When we realize that we matter, we make a difference, we start to feel that we have a place in this world. We have a purpose in this world. Once again, when there is pain, there is an opportunity for us to respond to that pain, right? I don't want anybody to think that you exist just to help other people. No, that's not the truth. But that is definitely part of our relational purpose, right? We're here to make a difference. That shows that you are part of this human race, this human family. You actually belong. You matter. Your presence does make a difference. And a lot of times people will think, well, I'm not a doctor. I'm not this. I haven't achieved this. So they feel a sense of insignificance. But when you start to actually put someone else's needs in your focus and realize, oh, I actually can make a difference, it will change your life. It really, really will. And it's the awareness of that. I help people every day, and sometimes I'm not even thinking about it. But when I stop and I do think about it, it does give me an awareness and appreciation that is fulfilling, right? It makes a difference. So when we do that, it starts to create this presence about us in our own lives, and we realize, you know what, I can contribute to the safety of some other people. I have the strength, I can do that, and it actually helps you to feel safe for yourself as a person. Okay, so again, mental health and mental wellness is really about being able to be aware and to access the full range of your personhood, of your personality, the ability to think clearly, the ability to act, the ability to create meaning, to engage with life, right? Everyone is different. So they have different strengths. They have different areas of strength and maybe even limitation, but that doesn't mean that you cannot have a fully functional, healthy degree of mental health for you. Okay, so when we do that, it really, really makes a difference. Okay, so believe it or not, when we empower ourselves by taking action based on being aware of what other people need and feeling a sense of sympathy and empathy, it actually triggers things in your brain. It activates happy hormones. When you take action, believe it or not, whether it's going, exercising, movement is really important. But when you move in the direction of helping somebody, it does something literally to your brain. It creates the hormones that make you happy, right? It's, believe it or not, it actually does something to your brain. And with, if you've ever experienced any degree of depression, you start to sometimes buy into the idea that the life is hopeless. Nothing really matters. I can't make a difference, whether it's in your own life, as I thought as a teen, or in somebody else's life. When we act with compassion, we shift that in our own minds. So it's really, really beneficial. So let's talk a little bit about what gets in the way of compassion. This image here, I think it speaks volumes, right? Just throw some things in the chat, somebody. What do you think gets in the way of compassion? What are some barriers to compassion? Whether you've experienced them yourself or you've witnessed them, or they're just coming to mind for you. Personal beliefs. Personal beliefs. A lot of things come to mind. Can you be a little bit more specific? When you say personal beliefs gets in the way of compassion, I would love to know a little bit more about that. The fear of being embarrassed. Oh, yes. There's sometimes a fear of being embarrassed, believing that you're going to be embarrassed, believing that there's actually going to be a cost to you, right? that it will be of detriment to you. If I act and try to help this person, it's going to hurt, right? I'm going to be harmed in the process. That's definitely a barrier for sometimes. Like I said to my that example earlier, I was concerned for my own safety, and maybe it was the wisest thing not to do to jump into the middle of whatever was going on. That is definitely a legitimate barrier to compassion. So religion and education, right? Sometimes you might not believe you know enough. Sometimes your religion might even suggest, perhaps, that it's not good to intervene, right? Some people don't believe that, it's okay to help other people. Some people believe that, you make your bed, you lie in it, right? There are lots of different beliefs that people have, right? The bystander effect, right? And sometimes the bystander effect is shock, right? Don't know what to do, right? Are unsure how to act. These are very common natural human experiences, but so are mixed emotions. Sometimes we can feel scared, but also feel confused, feel unsure, right? Feel angry. Sometimes you're angry with the person who is actually in need, right? You have mixed emotions. That can be a barrier to acting, right? Thinking that, you know what, this person deserves what's happening to them, right? I've told this person how to change their life and they keep doing the same thing, right? Lots of things, even our children. Sometimes we don't show compassion to our children, right? Sometimes we have these adages that, who don't hear must feel, or who don't hear will feel, right? And we want to leave them to experience the consequences of their actions, right? Sometimes if you grow up not witnessing compassion, not experiencing compassion, it doesn't come naturally to you, right? If you grow up really being angry or in an angry environment, you know, then believe it or not, sometimes that's what people do. They respond to somebody else's sadness or vulnerability with anger, right? I've heard situations where people, like, because we are so uncomfortable with vulnerability and weakness, it makes us angry at ourselves or other people. Sometimes people feel so guilty and they have a hard time feeling guilty that they end up blaming you for something that they're responsible for, right? Being able to deal with your own stuff is so important. It's not only healing for you, but it's healing for other people, right? Compassion, right, may turn out bad for you and you may not support people again, right? That's such a good example. Maybe you've tried to help other people before and you got burnt, right? Or maybe you believe the help that you are supposed to offer or that they really need, you can't give. So then you end up doing nothing, right? That could be a barrier, right? One of the things that I know to be a barrier, um, again, when we talked a little bit about the past, we talked about fear, but then there's also judgment, right? Sometimes we're judgmental and we blame people for their situations. We blame ourselves for our situations, right? So we don't show compassion. But if you've never had a conversation, like a whole conversation like we're having today, centered around compassion, maybe people don't even value compassion. They don't know the power of it. They haven't really thought about it. That can be a barrier, right? And I know somebody mentioned in the chat about it costing you, right? It's had a negative impact on you. If you've ever heard of compassion fatigue, you will understand that actually being compassionate can actually drain you, right? If that's your job, for example, if you're a nurse or doctor, teacher, right? A public servant, And if that's your natural way of being, you're giving compassion all the time. You can get burnt out from being a good person, right? Right? Like, it's really possible. Compassion can be a barrier to compassion, right? You give so much and you give and you give and you give and you give till there's nothing left. That can be a barrier to being compassionate, right? What about resentment? A lack of forgiveness? Oh, yeah. And it might not even have to do with the person that you're dealing with or the children that you're dealing with. It might have been a lack of forgiveness for something that happened to you earlier in your life. And you feel resentment. Because what is resentment? We could do a whole talk about resentment, but in short, resentment is when there are expectations that are not met, unfair, unhealthy, unclear expectations that aren't met. When you have a desire and it's not met, like, you know what, I want to go to Canada's Wonderland today, for example, right? That's my plan. I didn't tell my wife, I didn't tell anybody, I want us all to go to Wonderland. And then she says, we have several things that we have to do today. So, we can't go to Wonderland. It's not an option. Then I'm going to feel some disappointment. However, if I've been looking forward to going to Wonderland, and I told her like 3 weeks ago, it's really important to me. Let's go. Right. And she agrees. Yeah, we're going to go. And then she's saying, oh, no, I'm just not in the mood to go. Oh, and if this happens 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, oh, you better believe I'm going to feel resentful. Right. Sometimes resentment can lead to a barrier of compassion. So if you know yourself not to be a compassionate person, these are some things that you get to look at, right? Right? It's really important. So I want to come back to what difference does compassion make? As a listener, I know firsthand. People have told me what a difference compassion makes. One of the things that I talk to people about, and maybe our next session will be about this, listening with love, but the impact that listening has on people is profoundly significant. When you listen while people actually heal, they hear themselves, they hear their own thoughts, they see things differently. And people want to be heard. I was meeting with a teen at 6 a.m. in the morning every other week. A teen, like, how many teens do you know that wakes up 6 a.m. to talk about their stuff? And he was so excited. He was saying that, you know what? When I talk to you, you actually helped me unlock some things in my mind. It's like there was a room in there that I didn't know existed, and you helped me unlock that and have access to the rest of myself. Like, it's profound. Some of the deepest healing that happens is not because I went into somebody's life and did something. I knew a man, he was walking around with a rope in his bag because he was ready to end his life. I didn't take the rope out of his bag, but I was able to really hear his pain and respond to that without judgment, with care, right? That presence that somebody mentioned earlier, just being there, listening, right? Seeing the good, reflecting that he is a wonderful person and that he has so many wonderful impacts on other people's life. Like, he matters, there's significance there. Listening is powerful. Listening with compassion, listening with love. I think we're going to do that coming up soon, but it makes a difference. So every day there are opportunities, right? Every day there are opportunities for us to respond to what we see, to what we witness, to what we feel, with small actions, maybe grand actions, but either way, it's about the heart, right? And the courage to exercise compassion, to act on the sympathy and the empathy, to take action, right? So, how do we build compassion? Let's talk about that real quick. Um, it's important, like we're talking about, it's important to believe that it makes a difference. Believing that you make a difference, that's what can build compassion. Because if we don't believe we can make a difference, then we don't try. And remember, without action, you do not have compassion. You can have sympathy, you can have empathy, you can think about people, and if you do nothing, there's no compassion. But when you realize you have the power to act, and that action, again, it doesn't have to change the person's entire life. We're talking about significant yet small things that you can do when you believe, when you see that there's value to that. Some people think talking makes no difference. I'm here talking to you because I know there's value in that. There's value in that. Each one of you listening and watching right now, there's value to your life. You make a difference. When you believe that, you live based on that belief system, right? I'm a person of prayer. And one of the things I've been hearing from God is don't measure the impact by external things. Don't rely on the external evidence to appreciate the significance of what you do. And I want to share that gift with you. It's important to value what you have to give. See the value in it. If nobody else in the world values it, it doesn't matter. If you value it, that's what matters. That's what makes a difference. If I have something that's worth $5 million and I'm trying to give it to somebody and they're like, that ain't worth nothing, I could take it personally. Or I could be like, no, I know the worth of this. It's okay, right? I will give it to somebody else. Your presence, your love, your personality, what you have, your gift, whoever you are, that matters. So value it, okay? Value it. Somebody mentioned in the chat, one man's trash is another man's treasure, right? 100%. There are people who might hear me and look at me and be like, I don't know what he's talking about. I don't need that. Whereas somebody else would be like, he's so, because I've heard people say this, you are so calming, right? There's great value, even to the tone of my voice, to the presence of your face, your smile, right? Especially when it comes to family life. Believe it or not, your presence matters. Your presence makes a difference. Your loving hug, your whatever it is, it actually matters and it makes a difference. Okay. So take the time to really take stock of the value that you carry with you everywhere you go. Don't just measure it in terms of finances or those outward external measurements, right? There's great value to who you are and what you have to give. So believe that it matters. And let's talk about this before we roll over into some questions, right? Self-compassion. It is a thing. It is a thing. And this is the other side of value, okay? Another word for value is worth. Are you worthy of compassion from yourself? It sounds weird. But again, can you look at your life in a way that allows you to experience sympathy and empathy for yourself and to take action? Remember some of those barriers that we talked about earlier that get in the way of compassion? Believe it or not, that can happen for us. Judgment, for example. Judgment. For years, I was locked in a prison of my own judgment, right? I don't like this about me. This, I messed up here. I did this wrong. I didn't, this is not good enough. Judgment, judgment, judgment. Guilt. You did this wrong. You did this wrong. Why? You should have known better. Whoa. Where was the self-compassion? It didn't exist, right? There were ideas that if you are compassion, if you take it easy on yourself, then you're just making excuses. Oh my goodness. The day I realized the difference between an excuse and an explanation, let me tell you, freedom, prison bars, boom, open. Okay. Let me tell you, there is a difference between an excuse and an explanation. Okay. An excuse is a way to just justify and shirk and shake off responsibility. You just make excuses. Sure, you could do that in your own life. You could be experiencing that and witnessing that from other people, whatever. But as you revisit situations in your life, decisions that you've made, actions that you've taken, you can actually take responsibility, but then be understanding. Okay. When I say understanding, I mean like literally comprehension and compassion. Okay. You want to think about, how did I make these decisions? What did I know or what did I not know? What motivated me, right? Look at these things. A lot of people that I've worked with to walk through and out of a history of sexual abuse, let me tell you, the guilt, the shame, the condemnation, the self-condemnation, the self-loathing, the hatred, because they look back at themselves and they look at themselves now and they judge themselves. They don't value themselves. They think that they've lost value. They are worthless. They blame themselves for situations. And quite often the situations that happened were when they were really young. And I know we talked about this in past sessions, and by all means, if you have questions about this, we can come back to it and move a little deeper with it. But there is this reality that when we experience interruptions in our development, that's like trauma. Okay, that's a simple definition of trauma. It's a disruption, an interruption in our development, our course of development, whether that's physically, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. When something interrupts you, sometimes those moments press pause on our development. And it's important to understand that. So I've worked with people who have felt so much guilt and shame about something that was done to them when they were taken advantage of. And on a cognitive level, they know that, that somebody did something, but they have all this baggage about, well, I should have done something different. Let's talk a little bit about a power differential here. When somebody who, quite often the person is older or the person who has had different experiences, when they impose or exercise power over you, this is something new that you've never known about before. You've never had this experience before. And sometimes they use manipulation and guilt, right? This is new. When I ask people, well, what were you thinking at the time? Well, how much of this does a 7-year-old know and understand? They don't. They don't. So it's not actually, it's literally not fair to expect that younger version of you to know and do and be experienced and competent to respond differently. So when you look back at things, it's not an excuse, it's an explanation. And even for people who took advantage of other people, what were you thinking at the time? Because this happened to you. You were probably thinking this was normal, or you're probably thinking, I'm curious, what happens if this? Like, that's a 7, 8, 9-year-old way of thinking. That's an explanation, not an excuse. Are you still responsible? Yes. This is one of the beautiful things about my belief in the gospel and Christianity and this experience, because I believe God does that so well. He invites us, come, let us reason together. Let's look at this stuff. Though your sins, your actions, your experience, whatever, though they have been marred and messy, that's okay. We can address all of that. Just come. Let's talk about it, right? But you talk about it in a way that doesn't shame the person, right? You really understand. So the road to healing is paved with understanding, understanding in both just getting the facts, but also not being judgmental. So if you have trouble experiencing self-compassion, I want you to really listen for the explanation, to understand yourself, to look at yourself and your life without judgment, right? Yes. Somebody said it's important. Sometimes we forget. Another person said we tend to be too hard on ourselves. Yes, right? I'm glad somebody said they needed to hear that. Yes. Okay. So I'm glad to echo these words of healing for you and for people who are watching. It's so important, right? How you move through life is really dependent on what you think about yourself, how you value yourself. That matters so much more than what anybody else could say about you. The most influential voice in the world is the one in your head. If I say you're wonderful at something and you don't believe me and you don't see any value in it, that's going to win out. You're not going to act on that. You're not going to live from that place until you actually take it on and you actually believe it for yourself, right? So, does it count? I would say everybody on the call is in agreement, but I could be wrong, right? You're welcome to challenge any of these thoughts. Share your thoughts with me. We're going to roll over into a time of questions now. So I'm going to stop sharing here, but I know there are opportunities to connect with me through Pastor Francis, Nicole, or anyone on the YNOT staff. But yeah, let's keep the conversation going. Are there questions? I know I kind of covered a lot of ground today, but I just want to, yeah, hear from you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Blackwood. Again, it was such a great, like very informative presentation. And it's super, super engaging. I know we've had a lot of conversation today, which was awesome. I know these are all relatable aspects in everyone's life. So it is something that we are for sure taking into account, as well as I. So with that being said, I know Dr. Blackwood has left the floor open for any questions, anyone that needs any further clarification on anything. Now would be a great time to ask, whether it's in the chats or feel free to unmute yourself as well. We are welcome to hear any questions.
Okay, let me open my chat here. Okay. Is compassion a trait that is taught or is it innate? I think it's both, right? Some people are naturally empathetic, right? Some people call them empaths. They really feel what other people feel, even before they even know, right? So they're naturally wired that way. And some people are actually naturally courageous enough to act on those things, right? But then what we also get to do is cultivate empathy in people and children in our relationships when they don't seem to be naturally empathetic, right? And that's a lot of the work that we get to do, especially when children are and feeling anxious, believe it or not. That's something that gets missed a lot of the time, right? They might act out in anger, but they're not really seeing the other perspective. So helping them to move out of their own experience, to feel safe enough to move out of their own experience, to witness the impact that they're having on other people, that can also cultivate a sense of empathy in them. And then the next step is, what do you want to do now that you're aware of how your actions have impacted somebody else? What is it that you want to do about that? And then that leads to building experiences of compassion. And that's how we change the world. I really believe it really matters. I believe it makes a difference. So somebody said a lot of that is environment based as well. 100%. You know, there's no understating of how important modeling is for children, teens, even adults, right? Seniors, believe it or not. Some people say you can't teach older people new things, and that is not true, right? That is not true. A lot of the times we learn better from what we experience and what we witness, what we see, than what people tell us, right? When you tell somebody, you should do this or you should do that, they're a lot more likely to do that when they experience the value of that, right? So sometimes when you show someone compassion, they're like, oh, I remember that. And it might start with them showing compassion to you. I remember I was working with a young man, and let me tell you, he was the toughest brother that I've ever come in contact with. And you would think that he had no vulnerability, no softness, no compassion, no care. And it's not until you cultivate a degree of relationship where there's safety and then there's vulnerability and then there's openness. Oh, let me tell you, the hurt that that brother experienced in his early life, it was just overwhelming. But then his response of care and brotherhood and compassion and loyalty, oh, it's so moving, right? So yes, environment makes a difference. Yes, we can teach people how to be compassionate, right? Some good questions. Thank you. All right, this is a good one. How can you tell if someone is showing fake compassion? For example, YouTubers who do acts of kindness for views and publicity. Ooh, see, I never would have thought of that. Um, well, it's interesting. This is similar to question that parents ask sometime. Um, should I reward my child for doing something that is good? What if they don't have good intentions behind it? They're just doing it for the money. I think there's a little bit of a difference, um, but my experience moves me to think about my role. So, um, if this person is wanting help, number one, if your role is to be a helper with this person, it is important to be able, I'll come back to the child in a moment example, but if you're a helper, it's important to see the vulnerabilities that this person has. When people do good things for the wrong reasons, quite often they are lacking in one of those core needs that we're talking about, whether it's the need for significance, the need for safety, or the need for strength, right? What they want is to feel important, to feel that they matter. And they believe that doing this will meet that need. Inevitably, it doesn't. It really doesn't. So again, when we look at the source, we're not just looking at the behavior, we're looking at the true source, the true motivation. People think they're just doing it for money, just doing it for likes. But what does the like and what does the money do for them? It gives them a sense of significance and value. So when we look at this, then we can actually have sympathy and empathy because we understand where this is coming from, right? So in that sense, if you're a person of prayer, you can discern that, you can pray for them, right? If you're close enough to impact them, you can actually ask about those things, right? Um, so I know we can be repulsed by these things if we perceive it a certain way, but even if we are accurate about that, we then become judgmental if we don't go to that next level to think about what's really motivating this, right? And I said I would come back to the child aspect of it. As far as parenting goes and rewarding positive behavior that might not be coming from the best, most sincere place. I think it's a combination of things. We want to give people the experience of doing something that's good and realizing and talking with them about the impact on other people, but also on the impact on them when they do something good, right? I don't think it's enough to just reward them with something like allowance. I do provide allowance for my girls, and it's training in terms of seeing the value of money, learning how to count money, learning how to save money, because then they can give money as well. But then they develop the skill, right? You attach this to something that has value for them. And even though they couldn't count the value of money, they could count the number of coins. So there was this idea that this is building. So there was that excitement, and then they follow through on the action, and then they get good at the action. And as they're growing now, I'm like, okay, well, you can do this now, you know how to do this, and I want you to contribute to the family. This is something you can do. So now let's transition this allowance to something else, right? But you're still going to, we still want you to do this because you can, and that's what we do, right? So depending on the stage of development and your purpose and your role in their lives, how you respond to what might seem like good things for wrong intentions, it will be different. Okay. Very, very, very good question. Um, can you explain further the difference between excuses and explanations? Yes, for sure. So when I look at my own life, I really value integrity. And there was a season in my life where I was not honest about something. And let me tell you, for months, I was so guilt ridden and ashamed and upset with myself. And it wasn't until I started to step away from what I thought people were thinking about me or would think about me and me judging myself to really look at, okay, Andrew, what was going through your mind when you made that decision or those decisions? What was going on for you? Again, this does not absolve anyone of responsibility. You are always responsible for the things that you do. If you do them with intention, and sometimes even if you don't do them with intention, it's important to be able to take responsibility for what you do. An excuse tries to move away from taking responsibility. An explanation understands what was going through your mind, what was happening in your life that moved you to make that decision. It's not I'm not responsible. No, I am responsible, and I'm not going to judge myself because I understand why I made that choice, and I understand how I was in conflict with myself. When you realize, oh, this is who I am and this is who I want to be, I'm upset with myself because I know that that's not who I am. That's not the best version of me. And it's really reconciling this. How did this happen when I'm this person? When then you can realize, oh, and for me, it was a fear. It was an anxiety driven. I believed I was between a rock and a hard place. I wouldn't be able to provide for myself. I wouldn't be able to take care of my family if I didn't make this decision, if I didn't go along with this situation, right? A lot of the times we endorse things or we go along with things because we're afraid, right? Or we're not exercising faith. At least that was my experience. I didn't trust that God would provide for me, right? I put all the weight of making things happen on myself. So I bought into this idea that this is what I have to do. Was it wrong? Yes, it was wrong. Do I understand why I did it? Now I understand. Would I do it again? Absolutely not. Right? And that's where the healing comes in. I can accept responsibility, and I'm not going to judge myself, even though I'll say, okay, this is wrong. Because there's a difference between guilt and shame. Right? Guilt is a feeling, but it's also a state. If you've done something, then it makes sense that you feel guilty because you are guilty. Shame is a sense of condemnation. It's a sense of associating this action with your personhood, your identity, right? Not I did something wrong. I am wrong, right? It bleeds into your personhood. I am bad, right? It really leaves a stain on your worth, right? I'm not good anymore, right? It's the I am, not I did. It's right. It's the I am, right? I am shameful. I'm filled with shame. This is a part of me, and it's an identity thing. So when we move away from excuses and we look at explanations, we can actually take responsibility, but reclaim our identity, right? When we don't take responsibility, we're not claiming our identity, right? And I'm not talking about over responsibility or responsibility for things that you're not responsible for. I'm talking about appropriate responsibility taking. That's really, really important. That's invaluable for the building of esteem and accurate understanding of who you are. Is a part of that is taking responsibility. So an explanation is looking at the context without judgment. So you can understand both comprehension and compassion. You can understand and be understanding. I hope that clarifies that. Um, and again, I'm open to moving deeper with it. If you have a specific example, we can take it offline as well, if you'd like. Read this next message. I find being an empath is very draining, and I've had a hard time to do what you suggest. My daughter's the same at age 13, and it drains her too. Yeah, 100%. And this is, I'm doing a workshop, a conference on Saturday, actually. Um, and Nicole, I'll share the details with you. You're welcome to join us. But there's an element of experience. Okay, we're all wired differently, and many people experience emotions more intensely in their bodies than other people. And this is so important for us to understand because our nervous system can get overwhelmed, those of us who are really sensitive. And it makes it very difficult for us to access the parts of our brain that are involved in reasoning and boundary setting and conscious memory. So when we feel overwhelmed, we don't access this part of our brain, which is why we want to train ourselves on how to calm ourselves, right? We want to train the brain. We want to have a systematic way to learn to tolerate these intense emotions that we experience because that's how we're wired, right? So when we learn to tolerate these things, it's like these emotions are firing, but we want to be able to think, right? Critically at the same time so that they can work together. So we can create those boundaries, right? So that we can think, right? We can plan, we can anticipate even when we're feeling these intense emotions. So thinking about how we're wired is going to be really important, and developing a plan, having a structure and the support to say, okay, this has been the pattern. This is what I get to do on a daily basis before these things or outside of these things happening, so I can build that capacity, build that competence, build that skill set, knowing who I am as a person. Okay, so I think that will be helpful. We'll talk a little bit about that on at the conference on the weekend. Um, so I guess the important thing is how the other person feels. I would definitely say it's really important how the other person feels. I'm not sure the context you're thinking about, but when it comes to compassion, yes, I think it's important to be able to empathize and think about how somebody else feels. Um, And I know we talked a little bit about compassion, not being compassion without action. And I don't want to say that you prioritize how somebody else feels over your own safety. Sometimes that is a factor, but we don't want that to be the default, right? We don't want to just assume it's always a, a, a good risk to take, right? We do want to be aware of what compassion is, but we also want to look at the range of actions that we can take, right? So yes, it's important to be aware of how somebody feels. That's really important. But we also want to consider the other factors as well. I know that it's important to think about impact as well as intention. And we can come back to that another time because that's a larger discussion. But yeah, I do think it's important to think about how other people feel. Um, to dovetail off of off the point that I made, someone says, with the internet and all the self-help diagnosis, has it watered down our compassion radar and led us to be judgmental? Yeah, I definitely think so. We thrive in our environments on judgment and evaluation of people. Look, what do they call those shows? Reality TV. We find them entertaining, but a lot of the times we're judging people, right? Our world is based on comparing and measuring and assessing and assigning worth and assigning value to people we don't even know, to people we don't even care about, right? Which is the opposite to healthy and healing relationships, right? We want to really be extending care. We want to really be reserving judgment so that we can actually care for people, first of all, in our closest spheres, but then even from a distance. I think it's good to want the best for people and wish the best for people, even when we see them doing wrong or being unhealthy. I think the world would be a better place if our first reaction was sympathy and empathy and compassion as opposed to judgment, right? I think that would make an impact in our lives as individuals, right? But then also progressively as you move outward in your sphere of influence, people closest to you, that matters. People closest to them that are not as close to you, that matters, right? It's a ripple effect, right? What you do matters. How you respond to people matters. Whether or not you judge people or you respond with compassion, that matters, right? So I think it's an empowering way to think, but also an empowering way to live. These are some really, 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 really great questions. Okay, good. I'm glad that that answered it for you. That's great. I think we've had the last question. I'll turn it back over to you, Nicole.
All right. Yes. Firstly, thank you everyone for these engaging questions. It really has me thinking,
Mhm.
and it's really great. So I guess with that being said, unless anyone has any other questions, any other things that they would like to let Dr. Blackwood know, please feel free to unmute yourself or add it into the chat box. But if not, before we leave today, for those of you who are still with us, if you could leave your name in the chat as well as your email. That way we can take note of who is here in regards to the $10 Walmart gift card incentive that we have, so that you will be able to get them. So if you could please leave your name and email in the chat, that would be very great. And I do know I have also had a question in regards to our workshops being uploaded. So yes, as you can tell, this is currently being recorded. So yes, they will for sure be uploaded for your convenience and for you to share and access as well. So without further ado, again, thank you, Dr. Blackwood, for joining us today. It was great. I
My
loved
pleasure.
it. And I'm
My
sure
pleasure.
everyone
Thank you
here
for
as
having me.
well. Yes, I'm sure everyone here as well loved it. It was very engaging and very informative. well. So yes, without further ado, thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a great evening. Please do not forget to drop your name and email address in the chat. That would be very, very helpful. All right. So that's pretty much all for today, everyone. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your Wednesday evening. Thanks,
Bye,
Dr.
everybody.
Blackwood.
Thank you so much. My pleasure. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.